Call of Duty had been floundering during the PS4 Xbox One generation. Gone was the heyday where each new title in the series brought one of the biggest entertainment launches of all time year after year. From 2013 and 2018, the series jumped around from setting to setting, throwing whatever it could at the wall to hope things would stick. After 3 straight years of advanced sci-fi settings and a brief but lackluster return to World War II, the environment was ripe for a Modern Warfare reboot. Despite having seen its fair share of issues with their previous 2 entries in the Call of Duty series, Infinity Ward put itself back on the map in 2019 with the all-new Modern Warfare. While it would have been easy to just coast on easy nostalgia points, they got most of the old band back together and made a new and narratively relevant game that left an impact on the industry. First up was the improved gameplay, as Modern Warfare 2019 was built from the ground up on new technology instead of the same modified and patched engine all the CoD devs have been using since 2007. This helped the game further stand out as unique, as diehards of the series had to reacquaint themselves with the familiar controls, but an all-new feel of combat and gunplay. Not everyone was pleased, as there was a contingent of fans that preferred Treyarch and Sledgehammer's more mindless, arcadey style of shooting, but for many lapsed players at the time, the return to boots on the ground realism was just what the doctor ordered, and the game quickly went up the sales charts to become the best-selling game in the franchise at the time. And unlike in years past, the game had more staying power than just the typical 1-year lifespan before the next game came out. In part thanks to good map design, refined gameplay mechanics compared to its competitors, and excellent timing due to the COVID-19 pandemic forcing everyone to stay home, Infinity Ward's take on the battle royale genre Warzone took the world by storm. Thanks to the free-to-play model of Warzone, the overall improved gameplay, and the acclaimed single-player story, Infinity Ward had helped return the Modern Warfare name to the spotlight and potentially even thrusted it further into popularity than ever before. From the first week the game launched, a sequel was obvious. But before a second Modern Warfare reboot could be delivered, the other Call of Duty developers had to have their turn, which is where the wagon fell off the wheels a little bit. As per the scheduling of the prior years, Sledgehammer was set to develop and release 2020's Call of Duty title. However, Sledgehammer ended up being removed from the project midway through development when problems arose between them and support studio Raven Software, who's building the campaign mode. While not all the details have been made public as of this writing, the end results are obvious. Treyarch was brought in to build the multiplayer mode for 2020's title, and the result was Black Ops Cold War. While it took some of the ideas and improvements from Modern Warfare 2019 into consideration, like the all-new gunsmith mechanic, many felt the game was an overall step backwards for the series, as it was once again built on an old engine, a modified version of Black Ops 4's base code. While Treyarch had salvaged 2020's release by the slimmest of margins, hopes were not high for 2021. Sledgehammer's efforts were revealed as Call of Duty Vanguard, another return to World War II. While some features of it sounded promising, such as the use of Infinity Ward's newer engine and the plot revolving around the birth of modern special forces, the game released to a unified among gaming circles. Even the game supporters weren't huge fans of it, with many defense being some variation of, "It's not that bad." Unfortunately for Sledgehammer Vanguard, its writing was mostly on the wall before the game was even announced. Infinity Ward had stepped up in a big way in 2019, and they now had the intention of the fan base. So after Cold War, most everyone just saw Vanguard as a time waster until 2022. And to no one's surprise, Infinity Ward released Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 in October 2022, of course not to be confused for the original Modern Warfare 2 from 2009. While initially I planned on doing a full review for the game, the live service element on top of constant patches means that by the time I could make and release a review of the multiplayer components, they'd probably be hilariously outdated by the time I uploaded. So instead, I'll simply focus on the campaign, since I was always going to make a video on it to begin with to wrap up the Infinity Ward saga. What I find interesting about this entry is that since this is now the second game in a reboot, we see lots of similarities between it and what's come before. Like Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare 2019 was a mostly grounded adventure that prioritized being realistic. And with this new Modern Warfare 2, as well as with the original, the game mostly sticks to that idea, but ups the ante ever so much that the game can only be described as bigger. But does that completely work out this time like it did in 2009? Well, let's find out. Welcome to Modern Warfare 2. The game begins in the fictional territory of Al Mazrah, part of the fictional country the United Republic of Adal. It's been 3 years now since Captain Price has formed Task Force 141, and its agents jump all around the globe executing covert missions. For this assignment, General Shepard, played this time by actor Glenn Morshower, has tasked Simon Ghost Riley with getting a positive ID on an Iranian general named Ghobrani, who they suspect is secretly aiding Al-Qatala in the region to fight US forces and cause chaos. Once Ghost has a positive ID, Shepard unveils his secret weapon, the PMC known as Shadow Company, and a secret supply of ballistic missiles. Within seconds of the missile being launched, Ghobrani and the Russians are turned into paste, and Ghost confirms the target was killed in action. Unfortunately for everyone involved, this event has just kicked off a series of events that causes nothing but death and destruction. Months later, CIA handler Kate Laswell approaches General Shepard with the whereabouts of one Hassan Zyani. After the death of Gobrani, Hassan has assumed command of the efforts to use Al-Qatala against Western forces in the region. And while the group had been on the back foot following the loss of their leadership in the previous game and their retreat from Verdansk, he's now whipped them up into a formidable standing army. That makes Hassan a high-value target to the US, even if it means enacting a kill order on an Iranian operative. Shepard gives the operation Take Him Out a green light and sends in the 141 to take the lead with the Marines. Ghost takes the lead, and much to his dismay, instead of being partnered with other 141 operatives like Price or Alex, he's instead stuck with Johnny McTavish, or Soap for short. In a flip on the original trilogy, Ghost is now Soap's superior instead of the other way around, which allows the game to explore both characters further in this new timeline, but we'll talk more about that later. Arriving at Al-Mazrah, one of the Marines' helicopters is immediately shot down and the 141 is forced to clear buildings as they make their way to the crash site. In a great expansion of the first game, Infinity Ward has sprinkled in multiple clean house sections across the game instead of building independent levels for them. By doing this, players are often forced to take a tactical approach more often as opposed to charging in blind and shooting everything in sight. After the Marines are rescued, Soap discovers that the sidetracking cost them Hassan, who has managed to slip away probably only moments earlier. Ghost tells Soap that choices have consequences, which becomes the major theme added to this game, as well as the further exploration of the prior game's theme of where do soldiers draw the line and what's acceptable in war. Before we get a chance to really ponder that, the Marines locate a warehouse and fight their way through more enemies. This introduces a new mechanic into the game, as the campaign as well as Spec Ops feature armored enemies. And these are different from Juggernauts that act as bullet sponges. These enemies wear obvious armor plating that can be shot off and deteriorated. This is another great addition as it helps ground the game and keep the player thinking about how they should approach certain engagements. While it would be easy to expect this in Spec Ops, I think including it in the campaign as well was an awesome choice. Especially on Veteran, these enemies keep you on your toes as you're playing so you don't ever get too much into a lull, and I love that. So with the enemies cleared out, Ghost and Soap discover that the warehouse was for storing weapons, one of which is identical to what Shadow Company used against Gobrani. With clearly marked American missiles in enemy hands, this could be in a nightmare scenario, so Shepard puts all of the 141 on locating how many missiles Al-Qatala has and where they got them. We then cut to Amsterdam as Captain Price and Sergeant Kyle Gaz Garrick have a potential lead. After stealthily taking out the AQ guards, Price and Gaz board a houseboat and discover a meeting set to take place later that day between Al-Qatala and an organization that's going to help them smuggle Hassan to North America. After some sneaky spycraft antics, helping to keep the 141 rooted in stealth operations, they uncover that a Mexican cartel operating out of the fictional town of Las Almas is involved. Since Hassan is already there and without anyone else close enough to go in themselves, Laswell calls in a favor of an old friend of the Mexican Special Forces. Colonel Alejandro Vargas and his second in command Rodolfo Parra are tasked by Laswell to intercept Hassan before he can escape to the US, which he manages to do almost immediately. Despite not having jurisdiction, Alejandro and Rudy jump the border and go after Hassan, running into alarmed Americans along the way. After the two pull a Scooby-Doo and decide to split up, Hassan and the cartel get the upper hand on Rudy and manage to escape back to Mexico now that their safe house is compromised. This is only an hour or so into the game, and already the story is living up to the prior game by featuring elements that feel as if they could be ripped straight from the headlines. While controversial to some, I like that the game fully embraces real-world issues and politics and gives us something fresh instead of completely copying and pasting every plot element from the original MW2. Unlike the original or the previous title, the Russians are not heavily featured as hostile forces, instead relying on Al-Qatala and the cartel to be the bullet magnets. This helps to give the game a more unique feel amongst other titles in the series, as the drug cartel has never really been a major player in a campaign before. We had the Brazilian militia in the original Modern Warfare 2 and some guerrilla fighters in Black Ops 2, but each faction only really shows up for a mission or two and then they aren't seen again as the story moves on. So while at the end of the day they act pretty much like any other random Call of Duty enemy you've ever shot before, the change in themes for any of the bad guys at least helps things feel fresh. But moving on, with Hassan having escaped back to Mexico, that gives the 141 time to catch up and Ghost and Soap link up with Alejandro and Rudy to hunt down Hassan. It's here that they lay out the stakes of Las Almas, and the player comes to understand that the city is under the control of El Sin Nombre, the mysterious leader of the Las Almas cartel. Thanks to the rampant corruption in the city, the Los Vaqueros are essentially the only force that opposes the cartel, as the army and police have both been paid off. This becomes relevant very quickly, as after another clean house section, the army shows up to reinforce the cartel forces and the 141 Los Vaqueros are forced to retreat down a mountain, slowly getting picked off one by one until all the red shirts are dead, and just the named characters are left. This section was great and had me on the edge of my seat. Infinity Ward perfectly ramps up the tension at a faucet-strip pace with each regroup and subsequent gunfight. Being so outnumbered, enemies seem to have come pouring out of everywhere, and the lack of cover makes this section very difficult on veteran difficulty. The squad is even forced to fight back while swimming downriver, but just when all hope seems lost, salvation comes raining in from above. Philip Graves, the CEO of Shadow Company, has finally arrived with backup. With an AC-130 covering them, Soap, Ghost, Alejandro, and Rudy find the compound that Hassan is holed up in and finally extract him. Overall, the following two missions are very familiar to those who have played AC-130 missions in the past. Personally, I feel like this one is a minor step down from Modern Warfare 3, as the transitions between ground combat and the eye-in-the-sky perspective kept things moving, constantly kept you in the action from multiple points of view. But while mechanically these two missions don't really offer anything new, they do offer something new narratively. The purpose behind the original Death from Above mission in Call of Duty 4 was to show the cold and brutal effectiveness of modern combat. The TV operators reacted to everything with an impersonal and relaxed tone, often coming off as bored or uninterested in the havoc they were causing. While someone would occasionally raise their voice, the whole thing overall is a restrained and professional affair. That's not the case with Close Air and Hardpoint, though. This is where we begin learning about Graves as a character. As the head of Shadow Company, he's not a soldier. He's a businessman playing soldier. Dialogue later in the game will reveal he did spend time in the Army and Special Forces circles, but it's likely that he couldn't keep up and so went independent to make his fortune. While the previous game showed us characters who went over moral lines because they felt like they had no other choice, Graves is a character who crosses moral lines because he likes it. Bombing targets from afar or killing who he has to isn't something he just does to accomplish the mission. He does those things because he gets enjoyment out of it.
Hook, line, and sinker, that's what I'm talking about, Shadows! You know I love that!
While they come in handy at providing backup, it's clear from the outset that Shadow Company isn't the military. They may look like the military, they may sometimes sound like the military, but they're a rogue band of mercenaries who are often after the biggest paycheck they can get. So when it comes to torturing the information out of Hassan, Graves is all too eager to get going, but Laswell stops him from going too far by pointing out that if a US-run task force were to kill an Iranian soldier during an interrogation, it would be an act of war. So Laswell downloads what intel she can from Hassan's phone and sends Price and Gaz to Spain. What follows is another great example of iterating on the past, but not completely overdoing it on the nostalgia. Price and Gaz insert into the area wearing ghillie suits, and at first it appears that the game is blatantly copying All Ghillied Up for a cheap nostalgia grab, but later it becomes clear that's not what they're going for. While the level does recreate a famous scene from that level even down to the same lines, it only serves as a mini tutorial on how to evade enemies while wearing the ghillie suit. While the original level in COD 4 is tense, it's easily passable if you just stick close to Captain McMillan and drop the controller. In Recon by Fire, however, there is multiple instances where Gaz must go it alone and weave his own path through the approaching enemies. Having to do this yourself instead of following an AI's lead is incredibly tense, but I had a stupid smile on my face for how insanely smart a move this was. And on top of that, the mission also includes more in-depth sniping mechanics, making this the ultimate one-shot, one-kill mission, and giving the player complete autonomy over how they approach the situation. If I had one complaint, the mission maybe overstays its welcome by a tad thanks to the map being huge. If someone takes this mission slow and methodically, it can take them hours to complete. And the best course of action is to take it slow, as alerting the guards signals the fury of mortar fire onto your position, forcing the player to relocate and squad the soldiers to be sent out to search. But with the enemy forces silently taken out, Price and Gaz managed to discover an underground tunnel system that Al-Qatala uses for smuggling, as well as the detonators for the missing missiles. Before everyone can regroup though, Laswell is taken captive by AQ, and so the 141 is now on a rescue mission. Without time to spare, let alone manpower, Price calls in some favors, and we get reacquainted with Nikolai and Farah in Urzikstan. The plan is simple. AQ is taking Laswell to Al-Mazrah, so the Urzikstan Liberation Force and 141 must stop the convoy of enemy trucks before they can get there. If any mission in the game feels like filler, it's this one. Laswell is rescued by the end of the mission. The intel she offers is what she figured out at the end of the last mission. So with a little nip and tucking in the cutscenes, the entire level could be skipped and nothing much would be lost other than the fact that it's nice to see Farah again. And there really is a fun set piece where Gaz is flung out of Nikolai's helicopter and hangs upside down as the helicopter weaves in and out of traffic. But other than that, it feels like an overlong tutorial for the new driving controls in multiplayer in Warzone, which aren't exactly difficult to get the hang of. So while fun, violence and timing is ultimately forgettable overall. The next mission, though, is not. With Hassan gone, the 141 and Los Vaqueros need another way to discover where the missiles are being hidden, and with a target that they actually have authority to take down. With this in mind, it's decided that it's time to bring in El Sinombre to divulge the information on where the missiles are and to bring down the cartel in one fell swoop. Soap volunteers to go in not so undercover and discover who the mysterious crime lord is. After passing through an interrogation, Soap is allowed to wander through the penthouse, and the rest of the mission can play out one of two ways. If a player can manage it, Soap and Alejandro can sneak past all the guards and find their way to where El Sinombre is hiding out. And if that doesn't work, then there's always the tried and true method of shooting first and asking questions later. Either way, Soap and Alejandro manage to flush out El Sinombre, who turns out to be a former member of the Los Vaqueros named Valeria. As it turns out, she killed the real El Sinombre years earlier and took his place, easily running things from the shadows while publicly acting as just another lieutenant. So, with Valeria in custody, she strikes a deal with the task force. While she doesn't know what the targets are, she does know where the missiles are and when they're going to launch. The first one up is on a decommissioned oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. and to fans of the original MW2, this setting is going to feel familiar. The first half of the mission includes another tight quarters infiltration of an oil rig, much like what we've seen in the past. Unlike in Call of Duty Ghosts though, this oil rig being a little smaller and funneling you from place to place isn't that big an issue since the rest of the campaign has plenty of non-linearity to it, plus the oil rig is only the first half of the mission. The second half takes place on a moving cargo ship since it's discovered that while the missile was on the oil rig, the launch controls were on the container ship. Quickly heading over, Ghost, Soap, and Graves fight their way to the bridge across the deck of the ship. Like other places in the game, instead of going for the easy nostalgia, Infinity Ward ramps things up a little bit. While obviously similar to Crew Expendable from COD 4, this mission has crates on the deck that slide back and forth on a constant basis. That means sightlines and cover change frequently, not to mention that if you're not careful, you can get crushed between the crates as they slide together. While cool, I did find this part of the game slightly frustrating to play, and there's just a few too many cartel and AQ goons around for my liking. They'll hide in corners and ambush you as you're trying to prevent yourself from getting crushed by crates, or vice versa. I died way more times than I'd like to admit in this section and was happy to get through it. So cool idea, just a little frustrating in execution. But we're still not done as the missile is about to launch. At this point it can't be stopped, but it can be redirected, so Graves talks Soap through reprogramming it with various button prompts and they manage to send the missile right back at the oil rig. With the immediate danger over and half the remaining missiles down, the team heads back to the Los Vaqueros headquarters to plan their next steps.
What's this?
This is the immediate future. Step away from the gate.
What?
You heard me.
You're crazy. This is my base.
Not a base. This is a sizable covert facility, and I admire it. So I'm taking. You boys have been relieved. Thank you for your service.
No. I don't take orders from you.
Didn't Valeria say that? Now that makes me wonder what else I don't know about your affiliation with the drug lord. No one needs to get hurt here.
Are you threatening us?
Soldier, I don't make threats. I make guarantees. So let's not do this.
I'm calling Shepard.
General Shepard sends his regards.
And here's where the plot falls apart just a little bit, at least for me. Once again, General Shepard betrays the One for One and Shadow Company hunts them down. For many players, this was an obvious twist most of us were expecting, and I actually find it disappointing that they went this route, even if I do understand why, but I'll dig into that more later. For now, Alejandro is taken prisoner while Soap and Ghost escape back to Las Almas. The following mission then pits Soap against an army of Shadow Company operatives as he struggles to link up with Ghost. From the start of the mission, the wounded and unarmed Soap must scavenge for supplies and cobble together what he can to make traps and distractions to keep the shadows off his back as they make their way through town and kill everything in their path. While a difficult mission, I love that Infinity Ward had the guts to actually do this. They've given us missions where players are left with limited resources before, but they've never been this extensive, and Alone doesn't try to hold your hand like prior games would by giving you a heartbeat sensor. This is the perfect mission to also reflect the actions have consequences theme, as if you choose to use your shiv to open up a door to get into a room, you might not have enough material to open up a box with health upgrade in it or be able to make a trap later on. For a series that's usually just about running and gunning, this bare-bones approach is really refreshing to see, especially with how in-depth it is for a Call of Duty game. This level also allows Ghost and Soap to bond a little bit, as they only have one another to rely on. Through most of the game up until this point, Ghost has seen Soap as little better than an annoying tag-along little brother, never really paying him much mind and even telling him to keep up, as if an SAS commando needs coddling. But throughout Alone, it's clear that Ghost begins to warm up to Soap a little bit, which leads to some really good interactions between the two.
I want to be like you when I grow up.
You want to be better than me, Johnny?
Got my work cut out then.
That you do.
Think I'll live that long?
Probably not.
Yes. LT, about to play rough with the shadows.
I like the sound of that.
It's pissing it down out here.
Speak English.
It's raining hard.
Then say so.
I did.
We're able to get a better read on both characters here, especially on Ghost. He's clearly closed himself off and prefers to go it alone, which is why he takes refuge up in the bell tower of a church like Batman. So later, when he finally opens up to Soap and admits that he can't do everything on his own, it's a big moment for him. While this character arc is a little understated and the game relies more on subtext, it's really cool that they gave him a little something when all they really needed for people to be happy was him to stand there and look cool, and watching him and Soap bond is actually really wholesome.
All right, Johnny. You made it.
We made it, LT.
So, after escaping from Shadow Company, Ghost and Soap find Rudy at Alejandro's safe house, and they devise a plan to break him and the other locked-up vaqueros out of custody. This is where we experience another gameplay iteration from Modern Warfare 2019. Returning from the embassy mission is the CCTV camera segments, only this time we're not directing a terrified assistant around, we're directing Ghost. Ghost has the ability to take out bad guys from the shadows with his suppressed pistol or a knife. While he'll be killed if he alerts multiple guards, the ability to at least clear the field of a bad guy or two does open up more options in the level. From there, it's pretty much what one would expect from a prison break mission. Alejandro and the others break out and everyone fights their way through the prison until Captain Price and Gaz show up to help them out. Leaving the shadows behind, Price fills everyone in on why Shepard and Graves turned on them. Months earlier, a Shadow Company convoy carrying the missiles was ambushed by Russian ultranationalist mercenaries, and as a gesture of good faith, they handed the missiles over to Hassan to use in his revenge plot. Given that the shipment of missiles to allies fighting against Al-Qatala was off the books, Shepard's involvement could severely damage the US's reputation around the globe and cost him his job. Since then, Shepard and Shadow Company have secretly been searching for the missiles, and the one-for-one being involved in this recovery complicates matters. So while I was disappointed that Infinity Ward went with another Shepard betrayal, I do understand why they did it, and I think they handled it correctly. This version of Shepard isn't some evil mastermind trying to make himself a war hero, he's just trying to cover up a mistake of his that has spiraled way out of control. He never officially gives a kill order for the one-for-one, as Graves is more responsible for that situation spiraling out of control. If Shadow Company goon number 3 over here hadn't gotten trigger happy after Alejandro understandably got upset, it's likely that Ghost and Soap could have left and alerted Price of the situation, or they would have been locked up and Price and Laswell would have worked out what was happening and rescued them, as it seems like they did anyway. So turning Shepard into a more morally gray villain instead of an outright evil one does help differentiate him from his original incarnation, while also reinforcing the main theme of this rebooted series.
I do what needs to be done, and no one holds me down with a roll of red tape. I know what's best for the cause.
You've lost your mind, General.
And you've forgotten what you're fighting for, John. To do good, you've got to do some bad.
Not to mention it also reinforces the main theme of this entry as well, as it's Shepard's bad choices that lead to all of this happening. He chose to stray over the line, and now he and others are paying for it. While not as exciting or really as good a twist as the original, it does add some extra depth to this version of the character. While the original MW2 is of course a legendary campaign, the nuance they provide for the characters in this new timeline does help make it more believable on the whole, and provides the actors with more meat to chew on than before. Glenn Morshower was the perfect casting for this role as New Shepard, even if it is a little funny to listen back to the original Modern Warfare 2 now, where he played the Overlord commander in the Ranger missions.
Hunter 2-1, this is Overlord. We got a visual on a pair of enemy attack helicopters headed for your area. Over.
This is an intelligence failure, Laswell. It's not going to be a tactical one. There will be 500 enemy soldiers on that site by sunrise. We need a win fast.
All of the actors are really bringing their all to these performances as well, and the facial/motion capture really helps sell the performances. While the returning actors like Barry Sloan as Price are of course good to see back, the standout for me this time around is Samuel Raukin as Ghost. My first experience with him was in the AMC series Turn, Washington Spies, where he played a British officer in colonial America that was so over-the-top evil you hated him on sight even before he got to say anything. So to see him turn from playing an evil character I was willing to punch in the face on sight to taking on the mantle of one of Call of Duty's most iconic characters and not only live up to the role but improve on it says a lot for his acting as well as the writing for Ghost in general. As I critiqued in my video on the original Modern Warfare 2, Ghost in that game really isn't anything special beyond his cool look and his voice actor having voiced a popular but dead character in Call of Duty 4. They tried to make him the Gaz to Soap's Captain Price, but they didn't quite succeed. Thankfully, the character became popular anyway, so that now years later in this reboot, we can get what I can consider to be the definitive version of the character. If Infinity Ward wants to make a spin-off prequel starring Ghost like they've talked about, they've got the go-ahead from me. So while a couple of the plot details get a tiny convoluted at times in this story, the character work of the actors more than make up for it in my eyes, and get you to want to keep trucking forward, which is something the original Modern Warfare trilogy did as well. But getting back to the action, Graves and Shadow Company can't keep tearing Los Alamos apart, so the decision is made to retake the Vaquero stronghold. However, to give the team plausible deniability should something go wrong, they put on skull masks like the ones cartel members can be seen wearing in the city to disguise their true identities. I honestly find it hilarious how, with basically just a few missions left of the game, Modern Warfare 2 gave us a better and more realized Ghost team than an entire video game based on that concept. I honestly cheered at what a clever inclusion this was. So, with their disguises in place, Ghost Team infiltrates the Vaquero's base and begins to recapture it. The level splits into two main sections, one following Gaz with Team 1 and Soap with Team 2. Team 1 steals a helicopter, which is then used to provide cover as Team 2 storms the main gate. Alejandro and Gaz manage to secure Valeria so they can learn where the final missile is, while Soap and Rudy take down Graves once and for all. After a couple well-placed C4 throws, Graves' tank goes kablooey and him with it, or at least we're assuming. We never actually see him in the tank, so it's also likely he was elsewhere just taunting Soap on comms while someone else drove the tank. So if he shows back up in the future, don't be too surprised. But with Shadow Company down for the count, Valeria gives up the location of the final missile and likely where Hassan is as well, Chicago. Without a moment to lose, the 1-for-1 gear up and head back to the US to put a stop to his schemes, what has to be one of the best final levels in a CoD campaign. The final mission has just a little bit of everything, from rappelling down the side of a building to clearing rooms to a ticking clock to keep the tension up. It amazes me how good this final level is. Hassan manages to fire the missile in the 1-for-1 race to stop him, ending with Soap on his own and holding the launch controls. Bringing back the mechanics from earlier in the game, Soap has to simultaneously self-destruct the missile and evade all Katala thugs hunting him. After managing to destroy the missile in flight and take down 2 of the bad guys hunting him, Hassan gets the drop on Soap. Thankfully out of ammo, Hassan is about to drop Soap out of a window when a well-placed sniper shot from Ghost takes him down. With Hassan dead and the missile gone, the day is saved and the 1-for-1 can finally sit back and relax for a moment. I suppose it's here I should probably bring up that Hassan isn't the most threatening villain the series has ever provided, but he doesn't really have to be. While most of the game has the 1-for-1 chasing after him, he's not really the main antagonist. That title goes to Shepard and Graves in a dual role. If anything, Hassan is less of a character and more of a plot device, as his revenge plot with the American missiles is what kicks the main conflict into gear. So while he's not that memorable overall, he serves his function as well as he needed to, and I have to give props to his actor Ibrahim Reno for giving him an annoyingly arrogant attitude. He was just stuck up enough to make me irritated at him when he was on screen that I stayed invested in the search for him and never grew tired of him as a character. In that way, he's very much this game's version of Makarov in the original MW2, as while he isn't on screen long and doesn't have that much of a personality outside of just being evil, his actions kick the plot into gear well enough until the real villain reveals themselves. While Makarov is the better of the two since he had another game to flesh out his evil personality more, Hassan gets the job done well enough. And his motivations aren't completely rooted in fiction, as the death of General Ghobrani is based on the actual death of Iranian General Soleimani in 2020, which many have called a violation of international law. Many have criticized the game for adapting this, but considering all the fallout in its story, Infinity Ward isn't exactly approving of the action. It's more up for the player to decide. For me at least, I do enjoy taking pages from reality and reworking them slightly in fiction to tell realistic stories. That's how the Modern Warfare series got its start, and I think it's at least still handling that aspect well. And another aspect it's also still handling well is the characters. Seeing them all get to sit together at the end is really cool to see, especially since the first time in a Modern Warfare campaign, a major protagonist isn't killed or at least seemingly killed off by the end.
Everybody lives, Rose. Just this once. Everybody lives!
But there's no rest for the weary. While Price is content with Shepard being in the win for now and sure they'll get him eventually, Laswell says they uncovered the identity of who was running the ultranationalist faction that ambushed Shadow Company and stole the missiles that caused all this in the first place. While the man in the picture isn't known to Laswell, everyone else instantly knows who they're up against and what it means for the future.
Who is he?
Makarov.
Remember, no Russian.
And with that bombshell, we end the campaign. With the exception of an after-credit stinger showcasing that the Mad Russian is up to his old tricks even in this timeline, we're going to have to wait and see where the main story takes us. So far the story of the co-op raid seems to be dealing with more of the Kareem family drama than anything, so we might be waiting a while for our next real adventure with the 1-for-1. But if this game is anything to go by, I'm sure it'll be worth the wait. While the story got a little predictable at times, the amazing characters and level design more than made up for that for me. With 2 hits in a row now, I think it's very possible that Infinity Ward has clawed their way back up to the top of the Call of Duty devs, and I'm eagerly waiting for what they do next. Between the story, multiplayer, and Warzone, I'll be happy to continue playing Modern Warfare 2 for some time.